Okay, so at this stage in the process, you've done all of your detailed work. You've been through each individual channel. You should have sorted out your frequencies to make sure there's no kind of frequency content in any of your parts that shouldn't really be there. And that is freeing up some headroom for you. So when you get to this stage, it's really just about balancing your levels. And this is where having your parts grouped into buses is super useful and super helpful. Now, this track has, for example, 47 parts, audio parts going on. And if I was to try and balance each of those parts individually without putting things into larger kind of groups, it would be pretty complex work trying to figure out exactly where all of those sort of faders should be moved to. The benefit of having everything put into these easy to understand groups as we have here on this track is that you can simply move the fader up and down, and as long as everything is balanced internally within each group, then you should find it relatively easy to get a good balance across your entire track. Another thing that's worth bearing in mind when it comes to groups and buses at this stage is that if you have added automation, volume automation, to the group overall, then it makes it relatively complex at this point to then change the levels. So you'll be having to get into a load of automation. Much easier way to do that is just to make sure that these different buses, these different groups of sounds at this point have no automation on them, so you can simply move the faders up and down to get that balance as you like it. Now, the way I tend to do this is I tend to start from the ground up, usually with the drums and the bass and sub, and then gradually add in some of the musical elements until I have a balance that I'm happy with. And it's really important at this stage as well to take a step back really from all of that detailed work that you've done to get to this point. This is where you need to engage your bigger picture mindset brain. So you can just look at it overall. You shouldn't be really thinking about, is there a touch too much EQ on this particular hi-hat or whatever it may be. You should just be thinking, are the drums loud enough alongside the bass? So you see how that's a kind of bigger picture mindset way of thinking. What can be really useful, especially if you're not that experienced at doing these kind of final blends, is using some kind of reference track. But bear in mind that this is a mixed down track rather than a mastered track. And I tend to keep my mix downs apart from my masters. So what I'd be looking for at this stage is allowing some headroom at the mastering point. So I'd be looking for somewhere in between maybe -6 and -3 dB of headroom. That means that my master shouldn't be hitting more than -3 dB. We don't want to see it hitting 0 dB or crashing into a limiter or whatever, because what I intend to do with this is I'll be exporting this file and then I'll bring it into a brand new project and I'll use my mastering chain to actually create the final master. The reason I do that is because it frees up all of the CPU that is being taxed by having all of these different parts running and lots of processing internally within these groups. So that's really important. At this stage, when I'm looking at all of these different parts as well, I'm thinking about the relative importance of each part. So what does the listener journey look like from the beginning of the track to the end of the track? Are things like, for example, the stabs in this track, are they more important, say, than the pads? And that kind of decision making and understanding of what you want from those sounds will really help inform the relative levels of the faders. And if we just listen to this, you can hear that there are these kind of washed out pads, and they almost need to be slightly recessive. They need to be a bit in the background within the mix. And then we have the stabs, which are almost creating a sort of rhythmic drive to the track. So they need to be present, but they don't need to be too dominant. And then the lead diva here, these are the kind of sounds that are actually taking probably a lead within the track at this point. These are the things that your attention is particularly being drawn to. So when I'm balancing a track like this, I'm bearing that in mind. So for example, with these lead sounds, if I took them down slightly in volume, what that's doing is it's then allowing those main stabs to take a lead, and we've already established that we don't particularly want that to be the case. So that's what I mean about understanding the kind of role and function of each part. Like, the leads are supposed to be taking a lead at this point, so allow them to do that when you're looking at your blend. A nice little tip on how to go about this in the easiest way possible is sometimes I like to actually go into session mode to do this, just because in arrangement mode like this, it's not always that easy to be able to see visually the different levels that each fader's at. Now, if I click into these three vertical bars here on the right hand side, you'll see we go into session mode. And in session mode, you can see that what we have here is a slightly more kind of conventional mixer arrangement. And these are all our faders. Imagine this is a mixing desk. These are all of our faders. This is 0 dB here, this notch. And then anything above that, you would be effectively redlining these parts. But this, I just find it's a lot easier to make these kind of changes just using a more of a visual kind of reference. The other cool thing about this as well, using session mode at this point, is it allows me to see at a glance which of these sends I actually have content going to my effects returns. And again, if we go back to arrangement mode here, you'll see that it's actually quite hard to see without, you know, going into each part and then dragging them out and making sure you can see each of those individual parts. And then obviously with this many parts on the screen, it then becomes quite kind of confusing and quite difficult to figure out what's what. So that's generally the way that I build up a track in the very final mixdown stage. It's worth pointing out as well that from time to time you get to a point with a mixdown where you just can't see the wood for the trees. You know, you can't tell which should be louder and what shouldn't be louder. And there's a couple of things that you should do at that point. One is take a break, get out of the studio, give your ears a good half hour's rest. If you can, come back to it the following day. You'll usually find that after you've had a significant time away from a track, you'll have a number of epiphanies almost immediately as soon as you start listening to the track. And that is very, very valuable because, as we know, the more you work on something, you can kind of convince yourself of anything, really. Also, your ears get fatigued. You tend to start turning up the volume to try and make things as exciting as they can be. It's also a really good discipline at this stage to try and mix at the same kind of level. So you don't want it to be too loud, you don't want it to be too quiet. Just find a level that is comfortable, where you feel like the balance within your sounds is just about right. It's not too fatiguing on the ear, but it's not so quiet that you're really straining to hear stuff, because when that happens in either direction, those extremes, you'll find that you start overly compensating for either a lack of excitement or, you know, too much volume. So that's pretty much it on this tutorial. I hope you've got some value from it. As ever, leave any questions in the comments down below. And if you've enjoyed the video, please just like and subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of the new videos when they come out. Also check out my website at mixingmasteringmentoring.com, where I offer one-to-one mentoring sessions as well as mixing and mastering services. So thanks for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed the video.